We know that we have to eat real food and that we should avoid sugar, eat fiber. That's sort of the bottom line. But then a lot of people are wondering, what should we eat? I mean, we're bombarded with so much information. First it's the keto fad, then it's vegan saying, meat is terrible. And you've got things like the China study, which say, cancer rates go up when you eat meat. You've got the paleo, you've got, all these different diets. Now, from your research, and you've done a lot of it, apart from this really sort of what's become sort of a holy grail or a Bible, which is, protect your liver, feed your gut, those are the key precepts. But which diet does that best?
The short answer is it depends on you.
Okay.
It depends, number one, on your personal biochemistry, which you now can learn. There are ways to find out. Continuous glucose monitoring can tell you a lot. Okay, there are some genetic tests that can actually tell you a lot. Microbiome tests are starting to come into their own to tell you a lot. Ultimately, all of this information right now is data. We have to turn it into usable information, but we're in the process of doing that. So my expectation is that within the next 3 to 5 years, there will be an algorithm for being able to determine your personal biochemical profile, which will then tell you what foods are the best ones for you to eat for your own personal health. Having said that, today, that's not quite there. Right? We do have continuous glucose monitoring that is available. And full disclosure, I am an advisor to several companies that use continuous glucose monitoring information to try to alter people's eating patterns and people's diets in an attempt to try to improve health. We have not yet shown that it actually causes life extension, but we have good data on being able to actually mitigate the glucose and therefore the insulin spikes, because those insulin spikes cause cellular damage. That metabolic health problem we talked about earlier, okay, is because of high levels of insulin. So keeping your insulin down is job one for any diet. But you don't know which foods will keep your insulin down unless you have some metric, some biomarker for figuring it out. Currently, glucose monitoring exists. Now, is that enough? Not even close, but it's a start. Okay, it's the first thing out of the gate, right? Ultimately, we're going to need ketone monitoring. We're going to need lactate monitoring. We're going to need alcohol monitoring. We're going to need insulin monitoring, and that's going to be the big one. And that, unfortunately, is about 5 years away. Okay, we're also going to need postprandial triglyceride monitoring. All right, that's going to be even longer down the pike. So the point is that there's information to be had, and we are learning how to harness that information, and that will tell us which diet is best for which person. But in the meantime, until that's a real thing, and it's not a real thing yet, but until that's a real thing, there are certain precepts that we know do work. One is get the insulin down any way you can. You want a low insulin diet. Now, there are 2 basic ways to have a low insulin diet. One is don't make the insulin go up. Well, what makes the insulin go up? Refined carbohydrate and sugar. So we would call that a low carb diet. Okay, but it has to be a really low carb diet. Most people who go on a low carb diet are not going on a low carb diet. They are going on a medium carb diet. And they're still making, their glucose rise, and they're still making their insulin rise. So the concept that you can be on a 35% carbohydrate diet and call that low carb is a joke. If you're really on a low carb diet, you better be below 25% carbohydrate. How can you determine that? Well, you have to know your ketones. All right. Is there a way to know your ketones? Well, actually, there is now. There's a breath ketone meter that's available, or a urine. You can check your urine for ketones. But the bottom line is, if you think you're on a ketogenic diet and you're not, because you're eating more carbohydrate than you should, then you're on the worst diet. You're on a high fat, medium carbohydrate diet, which is the single worst diet possible. So either go whole hog or don't. So that's one way. The second way is what the vegans do. Now, I'm not against veganism. I'm not for veganism. I'm not against ketogenic diets. I'm not for ketogenic diets. What I'm for is getting the insulin down. That's what I'm for. So people say, oh, Lustig, he's low carb. Not true. Oh, Lustig, he's anti-vegan. Not true. Okay. What I am is for real food. So why is real food okay? Why does real food get your insulin down? Well, because real food has fiber. And fiber, by blocking that early absorption, is keeping that glucose and insulin rise in check. And if you look at the data in the literature, it turns out a high fiber diet will do as good a job at suppressing that glucose and insulin spike as a low carb diet will. So, in fact, the vegans and the ketos are actually on the same page. Okay, they think they're actually antagonists to each other. They need to actually band together and attack the real culprit, which is processed food, because that's the thing that never works. That's the thing that our bodies can't handle. And the reason is because that's the thing that makes your glucose and your insulin go highest. And that's the thing that causes mitochondrial dysfunction. And that's the thing that ultimately leads to chronic metabolic disease.